The Crashgate Conspiracy. Nelson Piquet Jr. deliberately crashes his Renault into the barriers at the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, and within seconds, he's destroyed not just his car, but his entire Formula One career. He's following orders from team principal Flavio Briatore and chief engineer Pat Simons, who want to help teammate Fernando Alonso win the race through a perfectly timed safety car period. The plan works flawlessly from a strategic standpoint. Alonso does win the race, but 12 months later, the whole scheme unravels when Piquet gets fired and decides to take everyone down with him. He walks into the FIA offices and confesses everything, providing detailed evidence of the conspiracy that rocks Formula One to its core. The governing body hands out lifetime bans. Briatore disappears from the sport forever, and Piquet Jr. becomes the most toxic name in motorsport history. No team will touch him after that, not because he crashed, but because he proved he's willing to cheat and then betray his own teammates when things go wrong. The Schumacher stomp. Michael Schumacher steps on the accelerator instead of the brake at the 1994 Australian Grand Prix, and that single moment of questionable judgment costs him everything he's worked toward that season. He's leading the World Championship by 1 point over Damon Hill. They're wheel-to-wheel at Adelaide, and when Hill tries to pass him, Schumacher's Benetton slides wide and hits the wall. Instead of accepting the accident and trying to continue, Schumacher keeps his foot buried in the throttle, somehow manages to get back on track, and immediately rams into Hill's Williams with such obvious intent that everyone watching knows exactly what just happened. Both cars are destroyed. Schumacher wins the championship through elimination, but the FIA is so disgusted by his tactics that they spend the next 2 years investigating everything about his career. They find evidence of illegal traction control, banned fuel additives, and a pattern of dangerous driving that paints him as a systematic cheat rather than a racing genius. His reputation never fully recovers from Adelaide, and 20 years later, people still argue about whether his championships are legitimate. The Grosjean missile. Romain Grosjean launches his Lotus like a guided missile into the first corner at Spa 2012, and in the space of about 3 seconds, he manages to destroy 4 cars, nearly kill Fernando Alonso, and permanently brand himself as the most dangerous driver on the Formula One grid. He's starting from 8th position. The field is bunched up for the rolling start, and instead of being patient, Grosjean decides this is the perfect moment to gain 4 positions through sheer aggression and terrible judgment. He cuts across multiple racing lines, collects Lewis Hamilton's McLaren, and sends Alonso's Ferrari flying through the air with such violence that the Spaniard's head misses a flying wheel by about 6 inches. The crash is so spectacular and obviously avoidable that the FIA immediately bans Grosjean for the next race. But the damage to his reputation is permanent. Teams start questioning whether he has the mental capacity for Formula One racing. Sponsors get nervous about being associated with dangerous driving, and his career trajectory shifts from potential champion to cautionary tale about impulse control and spatial awareness. The Maldonado madness pastor. Maldonado wins the 2012 Spanish Grand Prix, which should be the greatest moment of his career, and then immediately ruins everything by ramming Lewis Hamilton into the barriers during the cool-down lap celebration. He's just achieved the impossible by putting his Williams on the top step of the podium, beating Ferrari and McLaren with superior strategy and flawless execution, but apparently winning races makes him lose his mind completely. Hamilton is cruising slowly back to the pits, probably thinking about how his McLaren threw away another victory, when Maldonado comes charging up behind him and rams the back of the Mercedes with such unnecessary violence that both cars are damaged and Hamilton has to abandon his car. The stewards are so baffled by this post-race aggression that they don't even know what penalty to assign, but the racing world immediately starts questioning Maldonado's mental stability and decision-making abilities. Sponsors begin distancing themselves from him. Teams start viewing him as a liability rather than an asset, and his reputation shifts from promising talent to uncontrollable madman who can't handle success or failure equally well. The Irvine insult. Eddie Irvine finishes second at the 1999 Australian Grand Prix and then decides to publicly insult Michael Schumacher, Ferrari team management, and basically everyone associated with Formula One during the post-race interviews. He's been promoted to Ferrari's #1 driver after Schumacher's leg injury. He's just scored a podium finish that puts him in championship contention. But instead of capitalizing on this opportunity, Irvine starts running his mouth about how overrated German drivers are and how Ferrari's Italian engineers don't understand modern racing technology. The comments are so inflammatory and stupid that even the British motorsport press, who usually love controversial quotes, start questioning whether Irvine has suffered some kind of head injury during the race. Ferrari management is furious. Schumacher's fans want him banned from the sport, and other teams start wondering if Irvine's personality problems outweigh his driving abilities. His championship challenge collapses under the weight of internal team politics, and when Schumacher returns from injury, Irvine finds himself demoted to test driver status and eventually pushed out of Formula One entirely because nobody wants to deal with his attitude. The Barrichello betrayal. Rubens Barrichello is leading the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix with 4 corners remaining when Ferrari orders him to let Michael Schumacher pass, and his decision to comply with that team order destroys his reputation and championship aspirations forever. He's dominated the entire race weekend, qualified on pole position, led every single lap, and is about to score his second career victory when the radio crackles with the most soul-crushing message in motorsport history. Instead of ignoring the order or pretending he didn't hear it, Barrichello slows down on the main straight and waves Schumacher past like he's directing traffic rather than racing for wins. The crowd at the Red Bull Ring starts booing so loudly that it drowns out the engines. The international television audience watches in disgusted silence, and Barrichello's own mechanics look like they want to hide under their equipment. That moment defines him forever as a driver who's willing to sacrifice victories for team harmony. And no top team ever seriously considers him for a championship-capable seat again, because they know he won't fight when it matters most. The Piquet punch. Nelson Piquet decides to punch Eliseo Salazar in the face during a live television interview at the 1982 German Grand Prix, and that moment of violence costs him millions of dollars in sponsorship deals and permanently damages his relationship with international media. He's just been taken out of the race by what he considers Salazar's amateur driving. His championship hopes are evaporating, and when a reporter asks him about the incident, Piquet completely loses control of his emotions and his professional judgment. The punch lands on live television, broadcast to millions of viewers worldwide, and within hours, every major sponsor associated with Piquet starts reconsidering their financial commitments to his career. Formula One is trying to present itself as a sophisticated international sport, not a street fight between angry drivers, and Piquet's violent outburst undermines years of careful image management. The Brazilian's driving skills remain exceptional, but his reputation as a loose cannon makes him unmarketable to sponsors and eventually contributes to his early retirement from the sport. Teams start viewing him as a liability rather than an asset, and his championship opportunities diminish significantly because of one moment of uncontrolled rage. The Montoya meltdown. Juan Pablo Montoya is leading the 2004 Monaco Grand Prix when he decides to start screaming at his McLaren team over the radio about their strategic incompetence, and every word of his profanity-laden tirade gets broadcast live to television audiences around the world. He's perfectly positioned to win the most prestigious race on the Formula One calendar. His car is running flawlessly, and all he needs to do is maintain concentration for 30 more laps. But instead he starts having a complete mental breakdown about pit stop timing and fuel strategy. The radio exchanges become increasingly heated, with Montoya using language that would make sailors blush, while team principal Ron Dennis tries desperately to calm him down and focus his attention on actually driving the race car. His concentration completely evaporates. He makes a series of unforced errors and eventually crashes out of the lead while still arguing with his engineers about strategic decisions that no longer matter. The incident gets replayed endlessly on television. Sponsors start questioning whether they want to be associated with such unprofessional behavior, and McLaren begins losing confidence in Montoya's ability to handle pressure situations. His Formula One career never recovers from that public meltdown, and he eventually leaves the sport entirely. The Coulthard confession. David Coulthard admits in a post-race interview that he deliberately allowed Mika Hakkinen to win the 1998 Australian Grand Prix because of team orders, and that moment of honesty destroys his credibility as a competitive racing driver forever. He's just finished second behind his McLaren teammate. The team has scored a perfect 1-2 result to start the season. But instead of celebrating or making diplomatic comments about good teamwork, Coulthard decides to tell the truth about how modern Formula One actually works. He explains in detail how the team decided before the race that Hakkinen would be their championship focus, how certain strategic decisions were made to ensure the Finn would win, and how he was essentially driving a support role despite having identical machinery. The confession sends shockwaves through the motorsport world because drivers are supposed to maintain the illusion that they're all competing equally, and Coulthard's brutal honesty about team politics undermines the entire sport's competitive credibility. Fans start questioning whether race results are genuine competitions or predetermined outcomes. Sponsors become nervous about the sport's integrity, and Coulthard finds himself branded as a driver who's willing to accept secondary status rather than fight for victories. The Fisichella fumble. Giancarlo Fisichella is leading the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix in treacherous wet conditions when he makes the worst strategic decision in Formula One history and throws away what would have been his only career victory. He's driving brilliantly in his Jordan, managing the slippery track surface with perfect car control and building a substantial lead over faster cars that are struggling with the conditions. But when his team suggests switching to intermediate tires, Fisichella agrees without question. The tire change is a complete disaster because the track is still soaking wet. His car becomes completely undrivable, and within 3 laps he's gone from leading the race to spinning off into the barriers, while drivers he'd previously lapped come charging past him toward the victory he's just handed away. The decision is so obviously wrong that even amateur racing fans watching on television can see the mistake immediately. But Fisichella's willingness to trust his team's judgment over his own instincts reveals a fatal flaw in his competitive character. Teams start questioning whether he has the independent thinking necessary for race-winning situations. Sponsors begin viewing him as a driver who can't capitalize on opportunities, and his career becomes defined by that moment when he had victory in his grasp and voluntarily gave it away through poor decision-making. The Webber wingman. Mark Webber publicly announces that he's perfectly comfortable being Sebastian Vettel's wingman at Red Bull Racing, and that moment of submission destroys any chance he has of ever being considered a legitimate championship contender. He's driving identical machinery to the German, has demonstrated that he can match Vettel's pace in qualifying and race situations, and is positioned perfectly to challenge for the 2010 World Championship. But instead of embracing the competitive battle, Webber essentially concedes defeat before the season even reaches its climax. The comments are so defeatist and professionally damaging that even Red Bull team management seems embarrassed by their driver's lack of fighting spirit, and Vettel starts receiving preferential strategic treatment because everyone knows Webber won't seriously challenge team decisions. His willingness to accept secondary status becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as the team gradually shifts resources toward supporting Vettel's championship campaigns while treating Webber as expensive insurance against mechanical failures. The Australian's driving abilities remain exceptional, but his mental surrender brands him permanently as a driver who lacks the psychological strength necessary for championship battles, and he spends the rest of his career watching younger, hungrier drivers take the opportunities he voluntarily abandoned. Massa. Meltdown. Felipe Massa loses the 2008 World Championship in the most heartbreaking way imaginable when Lewis Hamilton passes Timo Glock on the final corner of the final lap, and Massa's reaction to that defeat reveals character flaws that effectively end his championship aspirations forever. He's already celebrating with his Ferrari mechanics, his family is crying tears of joy in the grandstands, and for about 30 seconds he actually believes he's achieved his childhood dream of becoming world champion. But then reality crashes down like a collapsing building when Hamilton's McLaren crosses the line in 5th position. Instead of accepting the defeat gracefully and using it as motivation for future campaigns, Massa completely falls apart psychologically, starts questioning every strategic decision Ferrari makes, and begins driving with the desperate aggression of someone who knows he'll never get another chance. His confidence evaporates so completely that he starts making unforced errors in situations where he'd previously been flawless, and when he suffers his horrific head injury in Hungary the following year. Many observers believe his compromised mental state contributed to the accident. Massa never recovers his championship-level form after 2008 and spends the rest of his career as a respected but ultimately unsuccessful driver who peaked at exactly the wrong moment. The Villeneuve vendetta. Jacques Villeneuve spends the final years of his Formula One career publicly criticizing every team he drives for, every regulation change the FIA implements, and basically every aspect of modern motorsport, and those constant complaints destroy destroy his reputation and employment prospects completely. Every interview turns into a bitter rant about how the sport was better in the 1990s. Every team briefing becomes an opportunity to criticize strategic decisions, and every press conference features Villeneuve explaining why everyone else is wrong about everything related to racing. His constant negativity becomes so toxic that team principals start warning each other about his attitude problems. Sponsors request contractual clauses to limit his media appearances, and eventually, no competitive team is willing to hire him regardless of his driving abilities. The Canadian's talent remains evident when he's actually in the car, but his personality makes him unemployable in a sport that depends on teamwork and positive relationships, and he's gradually pushed out of Formula One entirely because nobody wants to deal with his endless complaints and criticisms.